God for you is, the Torah, as you admit, is the word of God. Say you should love your friend like you love yourself. And in the book of Matthew, chapter 5, he say, love your friend and hate your enemies. The Torah never say it. The Torah say the opposite. Even if you have a Jew that is not your lover, is not such a great friend, he speak bad about you, is still your brother and you have to love him. Comes the book of Matthew, chapter 5, and say, love your friend, but hate your enemies, contradicting the Torah clearly. It's the same God, remember. They claim that God also gave that. Comes the Torah and say, you should love your God with all your heart, and all your soul, and all your money. Meodecha.
May I respond? If you are really a truth seeker, and I trust you are, may I just respond
to which one?
Because the last one is going to be very short.
Okay.
And very easy.
Which one? You should love your friend like you love yourself?
Yeah. Okay, let me read that in context. As you probably know already about me, context is very important. Without context, we can't arrive at any meaning. Yeah. And so Jesus says, you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. You see, what Jesus is arguing against...
the words for me.
What Jesus is arguing against is not Tanakh. He never spoke against Tanakh, but simply to say he would fulfill it. What he is arguing against there is the misrepresentation of Tanakh. Because you're perfectly right. Nowhere in Tanakh does it say, hate your enemies.
Okay, thank you. So now, it was my next thing to you to say is that the New Testament says, if a person hits you on one side, he slap you on your face, give him the other side. That's what it says. Give him the other side. The Torah comes and says, if a person attack you, you have the right to attack him first. Right? Everybody understand that? So it contradicts.
Can I respond to that?
Yes.
Okay. Jesus often talked in hyperbolic language. That's figurative, metaphorical language. And so often he would say, if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It's better to enter heaven without one of your hands than to go into hell. Now, what he is saying when he uses metaphorical language, and let me just apply that to what Yosef is saying. Let me read that to you from Matthew 5 again. He says, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. Again, he's not talking against Torah, but he's talking against the misuse of Torah. Because what people would do is, they'd say, oh, the Bible says an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. You hurt me, and you punched me, I'm going to punch you back. Jesus is saying, no. Jesus understood correctly that that is not a principle that we as individuals exercise, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. In no place in the Bible does it talk about revenge. That was a principle for governments to exercise. So what he was saying when he said turn the other cheek, he was saying rather than take revenge, what he meant was rather than take revenge, it's better to allow yourself to get hurt. Without talking against, of course they take it to the courts.
That's the contradiction. The Torah does not allow a person to invite another person to attack him. For instance, the Torah says if a person comes to attack you, you don't stand there and let him kill you.
You misunderstood.
Or maybe. Possible. Go ahead.
No, what Jesus is saying is, no, he's not saying let this person attack you first. Turning the other cheek and getting slapped in the cheek didn't really represent a physical assault. That was another way of saying if somebody verbally abuses you, take away your honor, it's better rather to endure that than to seek revenge.
I see. Okay, so I accept what you just say, but allow me then in that case to ask you this question. If a person sue you in court to take your jacket, your kilt, whatever you want to call it, kutonet, give him your coat also. The Torah say if a thief stole from you $100, what's the punishment for that thief in court? He has to pay double. It's in the text of the written Torah. Ganav meshalem kefel. A thief paid double. Comes the New Testament and say, not only that you agree with him illegally taking your jacket, give him also your coat. That means be a complete fool. Let the people come and take you. Now tell me please, if I'm gonna come, wait, if I'll come to you or to the priest in your church and steal or take or sue him in court for his jacket knowing it's his jacket, do you know one priest in history that kept the word of Jesus and gave his coat? I'm looking for this guy. Please find him.
Again, Jesus had utmost respect for Torah law. Let me just answer.
Okay.
He had utmost respect for the law of the Torah and didn't teach in any way to denigrate the government and the civil authorities. Not at all. But what he's saying, again, this is the context of not taking revenge. And he's saying, rather than taking revenge, allow yourself, if the court is going to be unjust to you, it's better to suffer injustice than to take the law into your own hand and seek revenge.
It says to sue you in court. Tovea otcha ladin means take you to court, not by violence forcing you to give him his jacket. This is the words. Suing you in front of the judges. Come, don't let him take away your jacket, knowing it's yours. Give him your coat also. What would you say about the next one? If a person force you to walk with him 1 mile, walk with him 2 miles. That's Matthew chapter 5.
Okay, again, it's the same context, because let me read that whole body.
Based on what you say, by the way, then every person, not a Jew, not a Christian, you will try to make him join the religion. And remember, we both agree that the Old Testament is the Word of God. I disagree with you that the New Testament is the Word of God. We never accepted it, and we have a list of many mistakes and contradictions, as I said before. But if a person comes, and we have a mutual interest to make him a believer, to make him a person that believes in a creator to the world, and he's going to hear you saying that there is a way to take verses from a divine book and translate it completely the opposite. Like you said, I believe you say metaphoric verses. Then, excuse me, but with all the respect, every person will take the divine book and translate it according to his convenience. Wait a minute. You should not kill. You should not kill. It didn't mean really kill. This is what you've been saying here.
Wait a second. We have to understand the literature. Whatever we're reading, whether it's the Tefillim or the law, we have to understand it according to the way it's intended.
Jesus accepted the oral Torah, remember. Accepted the oral Torah. Yes, he did.
I put the challenge.
100%. I will quote it again to you. I will quote it again. Wait. You say no, so no problem.
I challenge you to show me where either in Hebrew Scripture or in the New Testament there is any evidence for oral law.
Okay, first of all, I will give you in Parashat Shoftim, in a chapter of Judges, this is what it says. V'haya bayom ha'u, and in that day, for any generations, as you know, the Torah refers to every generation, not only to the generation that receive it. So it says like this, if you have a question, and you came to the judge, or to the rabbis in your place, and you ask them what to do, everything they're going to teach you based on my Torah, you must listen to them. Do not move do not move even a bit, left or right. You must listen to everything they tell you. And right after that, skip a verse or two, and you'll see the end of these sentences. And if a person does not listen to the judges in the courts of every generation, he should be cleaned from the face of the earth, and he did not listen to the rabbis that are in charge of the Torah. Now I'm going to show you where Jesus himself agreed with that.
Wait a second.
Wait.
You didn't even establish that that's talking about oral law, though. It has nothing to do with oral law.
Okay, tell me please, what's the meaning of the sentence, these are the Torahs and the laws, and the sentences and the board of stone that I put in the hand of Moses in Mount Sinai. Torahs, plural. How? Torahs.
In Hebrew, it means teaching.
No, wait.
Teachings. God gave Moshe many different teachings.
Okay, now when Torah in Hebrew, if you be a little bit more precise, in order for me to tell people, Torah means instruction. Okay, now please, I understand what I'm trying to explain. If a person wants to refer to one Torah, which is the written Torah, he uses the word Torah. If he wants to use for plural, he will use the word Torot. Torot, and this is what the Bible says. Those ele atorot.
Instructions.
No, you don't.
Teachings or instructions.
No, not true. Not correct. Not correct. Not correct. Because you have to remember, unlike in English you say instruction, instructions. But in Hebrew you don't use the same verses. This is what you say. Torah include thousands of instructions in the word Torah. But Torahs mean two different kinds of instructions. Now I want to ask you a question. It's an intelligent, it's common sense question. You believe in the Old Testament like me, so we have an understanding on that issue, what I'm going to ask you. Comes God in front of the mountain, and you should also, I hope you agree with me, that from 80,000 religions and cults, the only religion that was given in front of millions of witnesses were the Jewish Torah. Not Christianity, not Islam, not Buddhism, and none of the 80,000 cults ever started in front of witnesses. Now, in the Torah, God comes, that will be a little long, so please bear with me. No, until now, wait, no, it's not fair, not fair. Everything now, I gave you permission to respond, and I will give you as long as you want to respond. And when you responded for 10, 20 minutes straight, I didn't say a word. So I gave you permission to finish your subject.
Time, we're going to need a time.
All right, but I would like to ask you this question. Are you denying the fact that Christianity started with a story of one woman that never had even one witness to her story? She comes and claims God came to her in a dream. It also happened to Muhammad. Muhammad came from the desert and he claimed that Angel Gabriel gave him the Quran, which means, according to Christianity, it's possible that God will use a very strange way to come to a person in a dream or in hidden rooms and give him a book which is interested to publish to all the people in the world, but for whatever reason, he did exactly the opposite of his goal. Because if I would like to give instruction to all these large audience here tonight, I will not take one person and take him behind the scene and give him the instructions in a secret and then tell him, go convince the people that this is what I want from them. Why should I do it? As you saw in Mount Sinai, when God sent Moses to redeem the Jewish people from Egypt, he came to him in a burning bush. And he told him, I want you to go and save my nation from Egypt. Moses answered him this thing. Moses told him, I'm not interested. They won't believe in me. They will not believe me. They will say, God never spoke to you. If I would be God, thank God I'm not, but if I would be God, I would be very insulted. Why? If I have a righteous person that I want to make him my messenger, and I come to him and I speak to him finally for the first time in history, I reveal myself to a person, and I tell him, go and do ABC. And he begins to argue with me, no, they won't believe me. Right away, he has doubt in me. Why? Maybe I cannot do whatever I want, maybe I'm limited. You may expect God to come to Moses and say, don't be a chutzpan. What is this chutzpah? Just go and listen to what I told you. Abraham never asked question. Just do what I told you. No, that wasn't the response of God. Pay attention to the response of God. What did he say? You're right. I make a sign in front of everyone that they'll know that I sent you. When you gather the people around the mountain, I will speak to you in public that everybody will believe in you for eternity. Word by word, I'm quoting you the verse in the Torah. So what God told us is real opinion. My opinion is to serve my purpose. My purpose is that my children will follow my ways. As many places in the Torah it says, I wish that the Jews will be faithful and follow my laws. It's not so hard to keep it. It's not beyond the ocean. It's not above the sky.
Yosef, can I just interrupt you? I agree with everything you're saying.
I know. That part you should.
We have a saying, Christians have a saying, you're preaching to the choir.
No.
I am agreeing with the principle. And
I didn't say you don't. Actually, I started with the fact that you agree, but I'm getting to the point. This is all a preparation for the question. And I told you in advance that it's going to be long, so you cut me in the middle. And I told you that I'm going to give you as long as you need to respond to what I say, even longer than mine.
Be asleep by then.
No, they're not. They're used to me already. Every average lecture of mine is 3 hours and up. So, yeah, even though sometimes they force me out by 10 o'clock, but that's okay. Now, I mean, I'm going to make it a little bit shorter. So the point that I'm trying to make is like this. God already told us that when he gives religion, he is not interested to give it to a person in a secret. It's going to defeat the purpose, not help the purpose. When Moses asked him, nobody believe in me, he said, I'm going to speak to you in front of them because I want them to believe in you. What makes us think that God changed his mind? God is not me and you that change the mind every 2 minutes. He already told us the way he's interested to give religion. Now, when a person asks you, how do you know the Jews received the Torah in Mount Sinai, and you yourself will answer it to your believers, you will tell them, because millions of Jews were standing and listening to God speaking to Moses. That's why we know for sure the Torah is from God. Do you have one witness, one person, not two? Even one, it's not enough. You always need minimum two. Please tell me, do you have two witnesses that can come and swear that they heard God coming to Mary in a dream and tell her whatever the prophecy that you mentioned before? Or there is any two witnesses that God came to Muhammad and gave him the Quran? How is it possible that these people never thought to bring 2 or 3 or 5 witnesses to their story? Because everybody can say whatever you want. I had a dream. It's right away 50% doubt, forever. Tell me, please.
I can speak?
Please?
How long are you going to give me?
As long as you need.
You're not going to interrupt me?
That's I'm not promising.
We have to establish some better ground rules, I think.
Believe me, I'm trying. Please understand me.
And I agree with just about everything Yosef says. You know, I'll even go further. In Torah, it says that everything has to be established by 2 or 3 witnesses. And Jesus even said the same thing. He said, don't believe me if I'm just talking on my own, but believe me because of the evidences. And so I want to talk to you a little, just a little bit about the evidences. Has anybody here read David Klinghoffer's book, Why the Jews Rejected Jesus? Please get the book. He's an Orthodox Jew, and he's trying to justify why the Jews had every right in the world to reject Jesus. But on page 117 of that book, he admits some incredible supernatural signs, some verification. He said from the time of the crucifixion, for the next 40 years until the destruction of the temple, and he's getting this from both Talmud, and he's getting it also from Josephus. And he's saying these are things that Orthodox Jews believe. And he's saying in that 40-year period, from the crucifixion until the destruction of the temple in 70 A.D., 40 years later, there are all sorts of supernatural omens. Now, supernatural omens aren't good signs. They're really bad signs. And these are the signs that he talked about. He talked about a temple light that wouldn't stay lit. They kept on lighting it, and it kept on going out. The east gate of the temple wouldn't stay closed. It kept on opening. And if you know the prophet Ezekiel, you know that God left when he got angry with the Jewish nation. He left through that east gate. It was almost as if God was saying, I am out of here. Even more dramatic than that, Klinghoffer says that during those 40-year period, Throughout the entire land of Israel, people saw incredible spectacles in the sky, chariots and war cries and screaming and everything that suggested there was going to be a war. In other words, Klinghoffer agrees that there were all these supernatural signs coming from God warning about the impending destruction of the temple. Now, there are many forms of signs and evidences. The miracles that Jesus performed. You know, the Jewish people of Jesus' day never suggested that it was a sleight of hand by which he did these miracles. They all admitted that he did the miracles, but I think as Yosef was suggesting, that he did it by sorcery because he was in league with the devil. But if you'll read the New Testament accounts of the trial, they never brought that up against him as a charge. I don't even think they believed it. His signs were so incredible, and the good that he did, he healed everybody who came to him. He fed miraculously thousands of people on several occasions. He raised the dead. The Jewish people never took issue with that. They never claimed that he never did what the New Testament said he did. You don't even have that in the Talmud.
Please prove.
The Talmud doesn't offer any contradictory evidence. If these were fabrications that you find in the New Testament, the Talmud would be full of charges that these things weren't true. They never contested these things.
Okay,
and let me just finish. The very fact that the writers of the New Testament died martyrs' deaths, proclaiming to the end that what the things that they had written about was true, demonstrated that they didn't have any political motivation for getting together and lying about stealing Jesus' body away or these various miracles. In fact, when you read the New Testament accounts, and I hope you will because it's very interesting. In fact, it's very much like Tanakh, because in Tanakh you read about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and it lets all the ugly things about them hang out. When you read in the New Testament, you read about the disciples of Jesus. They were all meatheads. They were all foolish. They didn't even understand Jesus. But what that does is establish their authenticity. If they were willing to humble themselves so much in their own writing to show what jerks they were, it means that what they were about and what they wrote wasn't about trying to build themselves up.
By the way, you just answered one of my questions.
Good, finally.
And I tell you what, don't be so happy. because I tell you,
you know what? I got
you
something. I got something in here.
Make sure our guests drink in. But I see what you just said. As a matter of fact, the point I wanted to present to you is that the reason that the Old Testament is full of so many mistakes and so many contradictions, some of them
The Old Testament?
The New Testament is full of so many contradictions and so many mistakes is because the followers of Jesus, as you just said, were complete ignorant Jews. And he described his students who do not know Aleph Bet. And when you come to ignorant people that cannot be accepted to any yeshiva and ask them to falsify a book claimed to be from God, what do you expect? Every page has so many mistakes. Believe me, I have such a list here. Maybe 10% of the things I wanted. Not that I thought that I'll be able to do everything in 2-3 hours, but I only...
Yosef, you got a big problem there. I'll tell you what your problem is.
What?
The problem is, if these disciples of Jesus, the ones who wrote the New Testament, and granted they didn't graduate from any yeshivas, and they were unlearned, but if they were so laughable, how is it that Christianity took off? How is it that even many of the Pharisees followed what these foolish people were teaching, unless they were convinced that something miraculous, unless they were convinced that the hand of God was involved?
Very good. I'm glad you said it. And from your words, I'm going to prove to you that Judaism is the only valid religion. From what you just said. When I come to a crowd and I try to convince them to be my students. And I start to gathering all the homeless people of the street, as he did, as you know, those ignorant that do not know anything anyway, and gather them to be students and have himself a cult. When I come, and this is my goal, what kind of religion I'll design to these people? An easy religion to practice that everybody will jump and say, hey, we're with you, 100%, everything is allowed. Or I will design a religion that is so complicated, so difficult to keep. What will be an easier job for me? To come and tell them, for instance, one of the times his student told him, you told us that we're not allowed to violate any rules of the Torah. So how come you eat bread without washing your hands, without netilat yadayim? They asked him, those ignorant challenged him. So he said, he started to curse the rabbis. But in another page, as I mentioned before, he told his students, make sure you follow the instructions of the servants of Moshe, the sages, because they have it from generation to generation. So now, you just say that you must listen to the rabbis. Those are the ones who keep the Torah of Moses alive. And when the student asks you why you yourself don't listen to them, he started to curse them. Or when he told them that they're not allowed to violate the rules of the Sabbath, the next day, student came and they wanted to cut wheat on the Sabbath, and he started to see that they're getting angry at him. So he told them, I allow you today to cut weeds. Why? I am the master of the Sabbath. Come on. You just say in the book of Matthew, as I mentioned before, no one is allowed to contradict one little law. And if he does, he is going to be cursed
Yosef,
by God.
I'm sure
just allow them to violate one of the most important rules of God.
See, I'm sure they would like to hear my explanation.
Please?
I'm sure they would.
Please. You're cutting me in a nice way, I surrender.
I'll always try to be nice.
No problem.
What Jesus did, he never said you don't have to follow the law or the law is not important. And that's why Yosef is correct. He told the people to follow those in leadership. He did nothing. He wasn't a revolutionary. He did nothing to try to undermine the authority. But what he did do was point out that their interpretation of the law wasn't an accurate interpretation. You see, the religious leaders would criticize Jesus for healing on the Sabbath. And Jesus pointed out that they were hypocrites. Why? Because they did many things themselves on the Sabbath. They would water their animals. They would assist with the births of their animals. The priests would minister on the Sabbath. And so he understood correctly, and the religious Jews of the day should also have been able to understand that there are certain commandments that are more important than others, that it is justified if somebody is starving to death to pick food on the Sabbath day.
Wait, please. I used an example that is the worst sin in Judaism. Cutting weeds on the Sabbath is one of the 39 laws that we're not allowed to do on the Sabbath. You want the proof? I'll give you the proof.
Okay, let's see it.
I give you the proof. Comes a person named Slofchad. You read in the Old Testament, Slofchad. He went on the first Sabbath after accepting the Torah, and he started to pull weeds, trash from the ground, and Moses didn't know what to do with him. He took him and put him in jail. He asked God, this is what he did. What should I do with him? God came and told him, execute him in front of the entire nation, leman iru v'irau, that a person like this have no right to live. And Jesus, as I mentioned before, and you agree with me, I'm not bringing sources that are not exist, and it says he allowed his student to do what Slofchad did. Now you just said no one is allowed to contradict the Torah, and you allow them to do something that the Torah say that it's death penalty. And when they told you, how are you allowing us such a thing? You say, I am the master of the Sabbath. You have to make up your mind. If you're the master of the Sabbath, that means God does not exist. You are a new God. The Torah is not true. If you come and say the Torah is the word of God, be very careful not to modify it, and you come and start changing it according to your need every day, then not only you're not the Messiah, you're not even a student.
Are you allowed to defend yourself on the Sabbath? Are you allowed to minister in the temple on the Sabbath?
Not to the point.
But what is the point on this?
The point is, can I come to one of my students that's sitting here, and he tell me, please, I'm going to lose $1 million if I'm not going to cut my weeds tomorrow, because on Sunday there's a huge storm. I want to take my workers only tomorrow, Rabbi. I'm begging you. Please let me cut my weeds because I'm going to lose $5 million. Whatever the case is. Do you know in history, before Jesus, after Jesus, any rabbi that kept what Jesus suggested, not to move an inch from the Torah, that will have the guts to come and tell a student you're allowed to cut the weeds on the Sabbath? It's such a violation.
But wouldn't you admit that there are exceptions?
Yes, exceptions.
Wouldn't you admit that there are some more important?
Pikuach nefesh, only life risk. There is only one exception to the law. If a person is in a life threat, such as pregnant woman, she may get into problems, complications, or a person needs a hospital, we are the Jews driving on a Sabbath, or if we need to light fire to save the life of a Jew, even if we're not sure he has high fever, just there is a 1% chance that a person is going to die, comes the Torah and say, the laws were given for us to live, thanks to them, not to die.
How about circumcising a child on the 8th day and violating the Sabbath? Okay. Which comes first?
Comes the Torah in a clear sentence and told us that we are allowed to do it on the 7th day. And if you know, in the chapter 19 of the Talmud, the Mishnah, Perek 19, the Rabbi Eliezer, asking this question, and has about 2 pages with proofs and verses from the Torah. How do we know that we're allowed to circumcise the baby in the 8 days? And you asked before about the oral laws, and maybe that's the time for me to respond to your question. You have to use common sense, which is very simple. What's the common sense? God brings the Jews in front of Mount Sinai and gives them the written Torah. The written Torah say Torahs. You disagree with me, but we'll take it further. Now tell me, if God comes to millions of people. Remember, they're 1,300 years before Christianity, so there's no argument yet. The argument will start 1,300 years later, but at this point, everybody see that event. Comes God and say to the Jews, here is the Torah I'm giving you, and the Jews listening to Moses speaking. How do we know? Nobody would be interested to take such a difficult religion to keep. So many laws changing their lifestyle completely, unless if what the Torah says is the truth. So when I read about myself that God spoke to Moses, I'm a witness. If it's not true, I will say, Mr. Moshe, there's a mistake in the book.
May I?
Wait.
That's a good point. It's a good point. It's a very good point.
I will give you the time, but give me another minute. Comes the Torah to Moshe and say, come one Jew and say to the crowd, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, anybody heard here God speaking to Moses and giving him authority to be the leader? Please raise his hand. We are not interested to get it. We are free people. We want to do whatever we want. Like today, people don't want to be religious. What made millions of people all of a sudden became 100% strict and follow the rules? The fact that they heard God. Now, you may come and say, well, how do we know about the oral laws? Very simple. If you search in the entire written Torah, there are 613 laws. Not in one place the Torah gave instructions, the written Torah. The Torah never gave instructions for people how to follow this mitzvah, this commandment.
Which one?
All of them. The 613 laws that describe. Without the oral laws, there is no way to understand one law. Such, I'll give you an example. The Torah say you have to circumcise a male born on the 8th day. You should cut the orla. We know what we cut when we circumcise a baby. Now, if we wouldn't have the oral laws, right, when Moses bring down the Torah, people will say, what you brought us, Chinese book? Okay, God say you should not cut the orla. What's orla? Mordechai would say, Orla, it's this. He would say, Orla, it's this. She would say, Orla, it's the nails. He would say, Moses, what's Orla? There's no oral Torah according to your opinion. What's Orla? Where we have to cut? God said that if we don't cut it, we're not Jews. We want to be Jews. But God didn't tell us where to cut. Is it possible? I'm losing my eternity if I'm not circumcise my children, and God will not tell me even Aleph Bet how to do it, how to cut, what happened when the baby is sick. One question. Second, the Sabbath. The Sabbath. I gotta keep the laws of the Sabbath. I don't know if you know, but there are
May I interject?
There are thousands of laws.
They hear you every week. Maybe I can say something.
No, I'm answering what you ask about the oral laws. You ask me a question, I'm answering.
We need new rules. That's what we need.
Okay, so you say it like this. You say the oral
We
law,
need an oral law for our discussion here.
I'm asking, you ask me a question, I'm answering you. And the point is like this. God say you have to observe the Sabbath, and a person that does not observe the Sabbath, exclude himself from Judaism. Why? It's the covenant that we made with God. It's applied to Jews, by the way, also. Not only to non-Jews. But a Jew that refuses to keep the law of the Sabbath, he puts himself in violation. And he is not able to do certain Jewish holy ceremony. Why? Because it's the covenant that God made with the Jewish nation for eternity. That's the word of the Torah. Now, where does it say in the written Torah, from the thousands of laws that we keep, most of us here, where does it say it? Comes the Torah in 12 different places and say that a Jew does not keep the law of the Sabbath, he will be stoned to death, and his soul will cut for eternity. Tell me please, in the entire written Torah, God comes and gives me an order. You should keep the Sabbath. You should not do any work in Sabbath. Comes a Jew that just accepted the book and says, okay, God, I'm willing to listen to you. Where are the instructions? There's nowhere in the world where it's a one detail about the Sabbath. Same thing tefillin, the same thing, each one of the laws. Comes the Torah and separate between the written laws and the oral laws. And you know why? The non-Jews will not have it.
Okay.
Because if the non-Jews will have it in their hand today, nobody in the world will know if he is an original descendant of the Jewish nation. Why? Everybody wanted to be a son of God in that generation, because the Goyim, the non-Jews, they wanted to be religious as they are today. They want to join the nation of God, who everybody admit that got the Torah from Mount Sinai. Everybody, the Goyim, admit it. And they translated it to 70 languages, which show interest. So what do we have to do?
Yosef,
if
wait a
everything will
second.
be in the book,
Wait a second.
we will become Jews in 2
You're
minutes.
somebody who cares a lot about evidence, and I respect that. And you say that there must be an oral law, because if there was no oral law, we wouldn't know how to circumcise.
Not even a simple law.
Okay,
We would not
but
know.
Abraham was somehow able to circumcise, and he didn't have any oral law. The oral law, according to you, didn't come until Moses. How was it that Abraham was able to be a Jew and live before God and not have the oral law? Maybe there are other ways that they were able to follow the law without some mythical oral law for which you have no evidence.
I have news for you. There is a sentence in the Torah that says that I loved Abraham because he kept my Torahs, again, plural, written, and the oral, and the laws and everything. Ekev asher shamar Avraham et torotai, mitzvotai vechukotai. Avraham kept all my laws. Comes the oral Torah and ask your question. The oral Torah say how...
Prove my point.
No, the opposite.
I'll tell you how you prove my point. When you said that Abraham kept my Torahs, that proves the point that Torahs are instructions or laws and not two separate bodies. Because according to Jewish tradition, there was no oral law until Moses.
Who gave Abraham all the instructions, what to do and how to do, before the Torah was published? And I want to get your attention to one thing that the Torah says, that before the world was created, 974 generations before the Torah was ready, before the physical world was created. And before everything here started, the divine Torah was already existed. Now, if you know about Noah after the flood...
I need some evidence on that.
Okay, no problem. If Noah, after the flood, when he came out of the ark, how did he know how to tell the difference between pure animals and not pure animals? The oral Torah answer, because God gave the main people from the time of Adam. Every person that the Torah highlight had all the laws of the Torah for him and all his followers, until it was published in front of millions of people. And by the way, you should know that even the Sabbath was given a little bit before Mount Sinai. And now, you have to also remember one thing. If a person wanted to keep the laws of the written Torah, every Jew will do it completely different than the other. Now, you know that the Jews were living in exile for more than 2,000 years, until about 60 years ago they started to gather in Israel. You also know there were no internet, no telephones, no communication, and the Jews were spread all over the world with no communication. Now, you also know that when the Yemenites, for instance, way before the destruction of the temple, they went to Yemen. And the Jews were spread all over the world, and they gathered to Israel, as I said, just before Israel became a state. Each one of them brought with him, with his family, thousands of oral laws that did not change a bit. Circumcision in Yemen was the same one in Poland. And the same thing, the Torah. The Jewish Torah have 304,805 letters, much longer than the New Testament, much longer than the Quran. If you go to every synagogue in the world, you tell the rabbi to open the Torah. The Torah is the same Torah. Everywhere you go, you see the same Torah.